From New York, this is Democracy Now!
Eliot Engel, and I'll say his name once, used to say that he was a thorn in the side of Donald Trump. But you know what Donald Trump is more afraid of than anything else? A black man with power.
In what could turn out to be a major political upset, Jamal Bowman, a black middle school teacher from the Bronx, takes a strong lead over Eliot Engel, chair of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs in the Democratic primary. We'll air part of Bowman's speech last night. Then we speak to Palestinian-American legal scholar Noura Erakat about Israel's plan to annex the West Bank and the death of her cousin. He was shot to death Tuesday by Israeli forces at a West Bank checkpoint. We'll also talk to former NBA center Etan Thomas about how the Black Lives Matter protests are changing professional sports. And we'll look at how coronavirus is rapidly spreading through California's overcrowded prisons, including San Quentin. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Top infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci told Congress Tuesday parts of the United States are facing a disturbing surge in coronavirus infections, warning the virus is not yet under control. Fauci was testifying to the House Energy and Commerce Committee.
Right now, the next couple of weeks are going to be critical in our ability to address those surgings that we're seeing in Florida, in Texas, in Arizona, and in other states. They're not the only ones that are having a difficulty. Bottom line, Mr. Chairman, it's a mixed bag. Some good and some now we have a problem with.
Dr. Fauci's remarks came as the confirmed U.S. death toll from COVID-19 topped more than 121,000, though he acknowledged the official figure is likely a significant undercount. His testimony came as Trump contradicted claims by his press secretary that he was kidding when he said he'd urged White House officials to slow down coronavirus testing. This is Trump being questioned by CBS's Wei Jiazhang.
Mr. President, at that rally when you said you asked your people to slow down testing, were you just kidding or do you have a plan to slow down testing?
I don't kid. Let me just tell you. Let me make it clear.
In fact, the White House is set to end federal support for coronavirus testing at the end of the month. In Texas, lawmakers are warning of catastrophic, cascading consequences if Trump follows through on his plans, which would end diagnostic testing at 7 sites that screen hundreds of people a day. Global confirmed coronavirus cases have topped 9.2 million, with nearly 500,000 deaths from COVID-19. Latin America's regional death toll officially surpassed 100,000 Tuesday. In Brazil, a judge has ordered far-right President Jair Bolsonaro to wear a mask in public, or he'll face a fine of nearly $400 per violation. This comes as Bolsonaro continues to attend massive political rallies across Brazil, which recorded nearly 40,000 new cases Tuesday, the worst infection rate in the world. This comes as medical health officials announced a daily record of over 4,500 new coronavirus infections. That was in Mexico. The European Union is preparing to reopen its borders to travelers from dozens of countries, except for people traveling from the United States, who may be barred due to the country's high rates of infection. In the Middle East, Saudi Arabia announced it'll bar travelers from abroad who are planning to attend the Hajj this year amidst the pandemic, marking the first time in modern history Muslims from around the world will not be allowed to make the annual pilgrimage to Mecca. Voters went to the polls Tuesday in New York, Kentucky, Virginia, and other states for primary elections marred by long lines and fears over the coronavirus. In Kentucky, officials slashed the number of polling places from 3,700 to just 170, a 95% reduction. In Louisville, which has Kentucky's largest African-American population, just one polling place was open, the Kentucky Exposition Center. At 6 p.m., the officials locked the building, even as up to 200 voters were stuck in traffic waiting to find parking spots. In a dramatic scene, scores of people banged on doors and windows demanding the right to vote. They were allowed inside just before 6:30 after a judge ordered a half-hour reprieve.
We need justice. We need peace.
Majority Leader Mitch McConnell easily won the Republican Party's nomination in Kentucky. His Democratic challenger will be either progressive state representative Charles Booker or former Marine fighter pilot Amy McGrath. McGrath has an 8-point lead over Booker, with about half of precincts reporting, though a large number of absentee ballots remain to be counted, and final results aren't expected until at least June 30th. Here in New York, former middle school principal Jamal Bowman has taken a large lead over the Democratic Party's nomination for the 16th Congressional District in Westchester County in the Bronx over 16-term Congressmember Eliot Engel, the powerful chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Bowman's running on a Green New Deal Medicare for All platform recently joined protests demanding an end to racism and police brutality. In New York's 14th Congressional District, Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez fended off a challenge by former CNBC anchor Michelle Caruso Cabrera, winning the Democratic Party's nomination in a landslide. President Trump traveled to Arizona Tuesday, where he toured a section of newly built border wall, claiming the concrete and metal structure had, quote, stopped COVID, unquote. Trump's claim came as Arizona confirmed 3,600 new coronavirus infections on Tuesday, a daily record. Hospitalizations topped 2,000, also a record, with intensive care units now at 85% capacity in Arizona. Trump later held his second campaign event since the start of the pandemic, speaking to 3,000 students packed into a mega church in Phoenix. Few of the students wore masks. Many of them wore MAGA caps. None of them practiced social distancing, raising fears the Trump rally could be another coronavirus super spreader event. During his remarks, an unmasked President Trump drew cheers when he mocked COVID-19 and repeated the racist nickname for the disease.
Kung flu, yes. Kung flu.
On Tuesday, Twitter flagged another Trump tweet for violating its policy prohibiting abusive or violent language after Trump wrote, quote, "There will never be an autonomous zone in Washington, D.C. as long as I'm your president. If they try, they will be met with serious force," unquote. Protests against police brutality and racism are continuing across the country. In Washington, D.C., police in riot gear violently cleared a small protest encampment near the White House Tuesday. In Richmond, Virginia, 12 people were arrested as they attempted to set up a protest encampment outside Richmond City Hall. Officers used tear gas, pepper spray, and flashbangs to break up the protest. Meanwhile, in Oakland, dozens of students rallied Tuesday to push the school district to remove police officers from the city's schools. This is Jessica Black, director of the Black Organizing Project.
Children don't need to be criminalized for being children. Schools were supposed to be a places where children can learn social skills, schools and community. So what we're really pushing is we're pushing the institution of policing out, and we're saying bring community in.
In Kentucky, the Louisville Metro Police Department said Tuesday it's fired Brett Hankison more than 3 months after he shot Breonna Taylor to death inside her own apartment. Officer Brett Hankison will have 10 days to appeal his termination. None of the officers involved in Taylor's killing have been charged with a crime. The Center for Constitutional Rights and a coalition of other civil rights organizations are calling on federal prosecutors to release on bail 2 New York attorneys who are accused of throwing Molotov cocktails into an empty New York police car during protests in Brooklyn May 30th. The lawyers, Colin Mattis and Aruj Rahman, are facing a minimum of 45 years in prison if convicted on the federal charges. The 2 were initially released on bail, but then the federal government challenged the bail conditions, sending them back to pretrial detention, a move that shocked many in the legal community, since neither Mattis or Rahman have a criminal history. A group of over 50 former federal prosecutors also signed a letter opposing the government's handling of the case. A warning to our viewers, this story contains graphic footage. In the occupied West Bank, Israeli officers shot and killed a Palestinian man Tuesday at a checkpoint east of Jerusalem as he was on his way to pick up his sister, who is set to be married last night. Disturbing video from the scene shows 27-year-old Ahmed Erekat bleeding but still alive on the street where he was shot. He's the nephew of senior Palestinian official Saeb Erekat, who says Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was responsible for the death. Later in the broadcast, we'll speak with Palestinian human rights attorney Noura Erekat, who's Ahmed's cousin. In news from Egypt, plainclothes security forces abducted 26-year-old activist Sana Saif on Tuesday. The abduction occurred outside the public prosecutor's office in Cairo. Saif was attempting to file a complaint about being violently assaulted along with her sister and mother on Monday outside the Tora prison complex, where her brother, the political prisoner Ala Abdel Fattah, is jailed. In Mexico, a 7.4 earthquake hit the southern state of Oaxaca Tuesday, killing at least 5 people, triggering a tsunami warning in several Pacific coastal areas across Mexico and Central America. At least 2 hospitals in Oaxaca treating COVID-19 patients were among those reporting damages. The powerful earthquake was felt in several other states, including in Mexico City, where residents were forced onto the streets as buildings and power lines rattled and seismic alarms went off. Smaller tremors were felt in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. In health news, Johnson & Johnson has been ordered to pay $2.1 billion to a group of women who developed ovarian cancer after using talcum products contaminated with asbestos. In its ruling, the Eastern District Missouri Court of Appeals said Johnson & Johnson had, quote, engaged in conduct that was outrageous because of evil motive or reckless indifference, unquote. But the appeals court did reduce the verdict amount, which had been $4.7 billion. Johnson & Johnson recently stopped selling its brand of talcum powder in the United States and Canada, but it's continuing to sell the products overseas. In election news, Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden and former President Barack Obama raised over $11 million Tuesday in their first fundraiser together since Obama endorsed his former running mate for president in April. In Charleston, South Carolina, the city's begun removing a statue of former Vice President John Calhoun, who is a staunch advocate of slavery and a slaveholder himself. The Charleston City Council voted unanimously to remove the monument on Tuesday night after the 115-foot-high statue was repeatedly targeted by protesters. The monument is located in Marion Square, just a block from the Mother Emanuel AME Church, where 9 African-American worshipers and their pastor were gunned down in 2015 by white supremacist Dylan Roof. In Mississippi, college football star running back Kylan Hill said Monday he'll refuse to play next season unless Mississippi abandons its state flag, which features the Confederate battle flag as part of its design. Hill tweeted, quote, either change the flag or I won't be representing the state anymore, and I meant that. I'm tired, he said. And in Atlanta, Rayshard Brooks was laid to rest Tuesday, 11 days after he was shot twice in the back and killed by an Atlanta police officer outside a Wendy's restaurant. His killing sparked an uprising against racism and police brutality that culminated in the arrest of Officer Garrett Rolfe on felony murder charges. Brooks was honored by friends and family who gathered at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church for his funeral. Reverend Bernice King delivered the eulogy.
My daddy, Martin Luther King Jr., who taught us that true peace is not merely the absence of tension, but it is the presence of justice. Therefore, there can be no peace in Atlanta nor anywhere in our nation where there is no justice. No justice, no peace.
Immediately after the funeral wrapped up, Atlanta police announced the arrest of Natalie White, a 29-year-old who was reportedly close to Rayshard Brooks. She faces charges of first-degree arson for allegedly helping to set a fire that consumed the Wendy's restaurant where Brooks was shot dead by police on June 12th. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show here in New York, where Jamal Bowman, an African-American former middle school principal, appears headed to pull off one of the biggest political upsets of the year. Though the race has not yet been called, Bowman is leading by 25 percentage points over 16-term Congressmember Eliot Engel, the powerful chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee in the Democratic primary for 16th Congressional District in Westchester County and the Bronx. The Associated Press reports 92% of precincts have reported results, but it's not clear how many absentee ballots still need to be counted. Jamal Bowman ran on a Green New Deal, Medicare for All platform and joined recent protests demanding an end to racism and police brutality. He spoke at a campaign party late Tuesday.
I'm a black man in America. Raised by a single mom, spent some time in the housing projects, lived in rent-stabilized apartments, went to public schools my entire life, grew up during the crack cocaine epidemic, which hurt and ravaged many parts of my family as well as my friends' families as well. You know, my best friend who's here tonight, I'll never forget the night he called me when I was out partying at a club and told me his brother was shot and killed. And at a very young age, as a black man in America, you get to learn about death and homicide and suicide and how it impacts not just you individually, but your community and the rest of the country. And it was these experiences that led me to being an educator in the first place. And I served in that role as an educator with pride and passion and dignity, and tried my best to do everything I could to uplift the lives of every child that I taught and every child that I served, and to do everything I could to make sure families had what they needed and that they understood and leveraged the power of their voices. Unfortunately, as we all know, we live in a country where, despite our financial wealth, we have tens of millions of children still living in poverty. And as an educator working for the Department of Education for 20 years, I've seen the impact of poverty on the lives of our kids each and every day. And poverty is not a result of children and families who don't work hard. Our children and families work as hard as anyone else. Poverty is by political design, and it's rooted in a system that has been fractured and corrupt and rotten from its core from the inception of America, especially over the last several decades. So poverty and the impact of poverty on our children and dealing with issues of institutional racism and sexism and classism and xenophobia and everything that keeps the majority of us oppressed is what we designed this campaign to fight against. So tonight, as we celebrate, we don't just celebrate me as an individual. We celebrate this movement, a movement designed to push back against a system that's literally killing us. It's killing black and brown bodies disproportionately, but it's killing all of us. Eliot Engel, and I'll say his name once, used to say that he was a thorn in the side of Donald Trump. But you know what Donald Trump is more afraid of than anything else? A black man with power. That is what Donald Trump is afraid of. So if the results continue to bear out, as they are bearing out this evening, and we get to Congress, it will be our job to hold Donald Trump accountable and to hold every elected official accountable that continues to be beholden to corporate interests, that continues to be beholden to the wealthy, and is not fighting for the poor and is not fighting for the working class in our country. Because America, if we are truly powerful, we should use that power to create peace all over the world, to become a humanitarian leader on this planet, and to make sure we have housing and jobs and fully funded schools and infrastructure and health care that's exemplary and humane immigration reform and a humane restorative justice system that reinvests in communities that have been historically neglected.
Jamal Bowman speaking last night, a black middle school principal from the Bronx who's taken a strong lead over 16-term Congressmember Eliot Engel, chair of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, in the Democratic primary for 16th Congressional District in Westchester County and the Bronx. To see our interview with Jamal Bowman, you can go to democracynow.org. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, a Palestinian man is gunned down by the Israeli military in the West Bank. We'll speak to his cousin, the well-known scholar, Noura Erakat. Stay with us.
قلبي يحدثني بأنك متلفي روحي فداك عرفت أم لم تعرفي قلبي يحدثني بأنك متلفي روحي فداك عرفت أم لم تعرفي لم أقضي حق هواك إن كنت الذي أقضي فيه أسا ومثلي من يفي.
My Heart Tells Me by Rimbana. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I am Amy Goodman in New York. Juan Gonzalez joins us from New Brunswick, New Jersey, from his home during this time of the coronavirus. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Well, we're going to begin today in Israel and the West Bank. Israeli officers on Tuesday shot dead a Palestinian man at a checkpoint in the occupied West Bank as he was on his way to pick up his sister, who is set to be married that last night. A warning to our viewers, this story contains graphic footage. The video from the scene shows 27-year-old Ahmed Erekat bleeding but still alive on the street where he was shot. He's the nephew of senior Palestinian official Saeb Erekat, the Secretary General of the Palestine Liberation Organization, who said his nephew was, quote, murdered in cold blood, and wrote in a tweet that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is responsible for his death. Ahmed Erekat's family said he was killed while on his way to a beauty salon to pick up his sister and his mother. But Israeli authorities claim he tried to run over an officer at a checkpoint in the Palestinian village of Abu Dis, east of Jerusalem. His family rejects the allegations, is calling for Israeli authorities to release security footage. Ahmed himself was also due to be married soon. His killing comes nearly a month after another Palestinian man was killed in similar circumstances near Ramallah, also in the West Bank, and as Netanyahu plans to start annexing nearly a third of the occupied West Bank next month. For more, we're joined by Ahmed Erekat's cousin, Noura Erekat, who's a Palestinian human rights attorney and legal scholar, assistant professor at Rutgers University, author of Justice for Some, Law and the Question of Palestine. Noura, our condolences to you and your family. This is such a terrible time for you. We so deeply appreciate you're able to join us. This is just hours after your cousin was killed. Can you describe the circumstances under which you understand he died?
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Juan. And to the viewers, I haven't had a chance to speak to his parents, so I want to start out by saying صباح الخير أم فيصل وأبو فيصل وخالته أم زياد ولكل العائلة يسلم راسكم وأنا متأسفة كتير. We understand the circumstances to be what people know. Ahmed was on his way from Abu Dis to Bethlehem to pick up his sister from a hair salon for her wedding. Her mom was there with her. You know, on the way to the hair salon, he passed through a checkpoint separating Bethlehem from Abu Dis through a known roadway, back roadway, a dangerous one known as Wadi Nar, or Valley of Fire. There is a steep decline between this checkpoint on the road. And what we understand is that Ahmed lost control of his car or was confused while he was in his car. That was all it took to have a knee-jerk reaction for the car to jerk a little bit and immediately to cause the soldiers to open fire on him multiple times. Note that these soldiers who are fully armed at this checkpoint are behind barriers, are not actually out in the open, and then left Ahmed to bleed for 1.5 hours. We also understand that his father, Abu Faisal, was there pleading with the Israeli soldiers to let him access his son. We also know that the Palestinian Red Crescent, the equivalent of the Red Cross, was not allowed access. And for 1.5 hours, as you saw in that inexplicable video, Ahmed was left writhing and bleeding out without the ability to care for him. And what is very obvious is the ease and the callousness with which this happened, the way that it's normalized completely. And there's a Palestinian, there's a line, a queue of Palestinian cars. And the one filming this, who's praying over Ahmed as he's dying, should remind us that even those Palestinians who are bearing witness to this are subject to a state of forced helplessness. They are not even allowed to help Ahmed in that moment. I want to just bring up something, Amy, to the audience before I address Israel's vicious, dangerous, and disgusting allegations that this was a car ramming, and raise 3 questions for the audience that's paying attention right now. Right now, it's 1, why is Abu Dis, where Ahmad and my family is from, so severely underdeveloped that he has to travel outside to one of the big Palestinian cities in order to get his sisters from a hair salon? What is the cause of that underdevelopment? Number 2, I want to ask the audience to think about the biggest Palestinian city and commercial center to Abu Dis is Jerusalem. Abu Dis is a suburb of Jerusalem and has been cut off from it by the apartheid wall. Why can't Palestinians, why couldn't my family get to Jerusalem and instead have to travel to Bethlehem? And number 3, and so importantly, why is there a checkpoint between Bethlehem and Abu Dis, 2 Palestinian cities? Why are there checkpoints anywhere? Just think about those questions as we answer this broader question of the context that Ahmad was killed in.
And Noura, that last point that you, first of all, my deepest condolences to you and your family. But I wanted to precisely ask that question. What are these checkpoints that are within Palestinian territory that apparently are not even near any Israeli settlements? How many of them are there? And what is the justification for them from Israel's perspective?
Thank you for that question. The Palestinian checkpoint, the checkpoints that divide Palestinians from one another and that separate them from their homes are an invention of the peace process. In 1995, the Palestinian West Bank and Gaza were separated into 3 jurisdictions, A, B, and C, demarking what was under full Israeli civil and military control and what was under some shared control. Note that Area C, or 60% of the West Bank, is the largest area. It is what is now being marked for annexation, and it is what came under full Israeli civil and security control. The checkpoints that are erected are meant to police Palestinians from traveling from amongst their cities and with one another, and they are placed precisely to divide Palestinians from one another in order to delimit and to quell any kind of national cohesion and uprising. They are also set up because they are policing Palestinians who are not to travel next to settlements, around settlements, through settlements, which are all built on confiscated Palestinian lands. And you asked, sometimes these checkpoints are built around places where there are no settlements, but there will be. But there will be. All of Palestinian territory is marked for Israeli settlement and is marked for the removal of Palestinians. Palestinians have been steadily removed from their homes. They are demolished. Roads are built over them for Israelis only. Settlements are built on top of them. And Palestinians are ever contained into smaller and smaller tracts of land that the Trump administration just revealed in January will become their permanent Bantustans or reservations, where they will be able to practice autonomy, which or derivative sovereignty, but never a form of freedom, and they will be forever dominated. I want to switch really quick because this is the concern of the family. In the aftermath of Ahmad's murder, Israel immediately started a propaganda campaign blaming Ahmad for his own death and alleging that he was tried to ram his car into the checkpoint. This is a lie. This is an incredibly hurtful lie, but it's a systematic lie that Israel tells as it kills Palestinians and blames them for their own death. What we know is that Israel has done this systematically. We know that they have used this. As people have said, this is prepared and ready argument. We know that from May to October 2018, Israel killed 267 Palestinians in Gaza who were unarmed. That was supported by the Israeli police, by the Israeli military establishment, its political establishment, and it was rubber stamped as a shoot-to-kill policy by the Israeli High Court. We know among those murdered was paramedic 21-year-old Razan al-Najjar, who had her hands up, was wearing a paramedic vest, and was shot in the back. When she was killed, the Israeli military released a doctored video claiming that Razan said, "I am a human shield." What they failed to play was the rest of Razan's clip, where she said, "I am a human shield on the here on the line being a protective human shield, saving the injured. But the Israeli military doctored that video to say that she was a human shield for Hamas. And guess what? The entire world stopped asking questions. The moment you say Hamas, the moment you say Palestinian violence, the moment you say Palestinian resistance, it's as if we expect that to be a carte blanche to kill as many Palestinians as possible. They did it with Razan. They did it with Iyad al-Hallaq. They did it with Ahmed yesterday. And right now the family is demanding that Ahmed's body, his corpse, be returned. It is being withheld as a form of collective punishment. We are also demanding that the home be protected because Israel has a policy of demolishing homes of Palestinians they consider alleged assailants without, of course, any kind of trial. We are demanding that the footage be released and atone and apologize and address the systematic violence. It bears to note that in 2017, the Human Rights Council at the UN examined the cases of Israel's systematic killings of Palestinians and concluded, quote, that Israel often used lethal force against Palestinians on mere suspicion or as a precautionary measure. Israeli soldiers kill Palestinians as precautionary measure. And the rest of the world accepts this because of how used to the loss of Palestinian lives we have become numb to. This is normalized. This amount of killing is normalized. And this is the context in which Ahmed now, his family is fighting for justice in his name and is also mourning his life at the same time.
Nora Erakat, as you describe Ahmed, he was picking up his mom and his sister. His sister was going to be married last night. He was picking them up from the salon. His sister Iman fainted when she heard what had taken place, and he himself was going to be married in just a few weeks.
Indeed. So the other part of the story that doesn't add up, and frankly, one of the things about this is you're telling us these details, Amy, right? And so most listeners would think naturally, why would a young man, 27 years old, with his own T-shirt business, who's incredibly happy and smiling on the day of his sister's wedding, plan an attack against an Israeli checkpoint, which is basically a suicide mission? Why would he do that? Normal people will ask that, and normal empathetic people will say it is impossible. And yet, because of the dehumanization of Palestinians and the racism with which our stories are cloaked, there are some who might say, yeah, it's possible. Palestinians are driven by a hatred for Jews and are basically born in order to kill. As former Justice Minister Ayad Shak had said, Palestinian mothers should be killed because they birth snakes. This is the discourse of the highest people in office in Israel, not of the random extremists, but of its representatives who represent them to the world, this so-called only democracy. And yes, Ahmed was incredibly proud of the home he had furnished and prepared for his wife to be. They had shared pictures of him in his home and had so much to live for and deserved to live and deserves justice and deserves our support in demanding justice and demanding accountability. This is not about one bad Israeli soldier, just as it's not about one bad cop ever. This is a system. It is an apartheid system. It is a settler colonial system that enshrines Jewish Israeli supremacy as a matter of law and policy on an international scale. And it is one that marks Palestinians for removal, exile, or death. And it is done with the full, unequivocal diplomatic, financial, military support of the United States and with the complicity of the international community. So it bears upon us to respond in this moment by supporting the Palestinian call for freedom, by doing the little that we can, by engaging in boycott, divestment, and sanctions for Ahmed, for Razan, for Iyad, oppose the annexation, to oppose apartheid, to fight for freedom.
Noura Erakat, we want to thank you for being with us again. Our condolences to your family. Noura is a Palestinian human rights attorney, legal scholar, colleague of Juan's over at Rutgers, assistant professor at Rutgers University, and author of Justice for Some, Law and the Question of Palestine. Over 1,000 European MPs have written a letter opposing Israel's plan to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. Also, the final tweet, one of the tweets of Noura Erakat, our guest, after Ahmed died, they left him to bleed out like this. For 1.5 hours, his name is Ahmed. He deserved to live. He deserved to dance tonight with his family to celebrate his sister. He deserved to dance at his wedding to nurture family, to live. This is not a picture of Ahmed, but of Israel's ugliness, she wrote. When we come back, we look at the fight for racial justice in sports with Etan Thomas, former NBA player, co-host of the podcast The Collision, where sports and politics collide. Stay with us.
There's already so much pain, so much pain, so much pain. There's already so much pain, and there ain't nothing else we can do. Hey, Sheila, there's already so much pain, so much pain, so much pain. There's already so much pain, and there ain't nothing else we can do. All right, listen up. They got tanks coming through right here, through right here, through right here. They got tanks coming through right here, and there ain't nothing else we can do. All together, they got tanks coming through right here, through right here, through right here. They got tanks coming through right here, and there ain't nothing else we can do but to fight. Yeah. Nothing to do but fight. Stand up to the right to fight. Yeah, it's your moral right to stand against the fight. Staring officers in the face, spraying with mace for no reason. Saying dead bodies in the street, and there ain't
Fight by Wyatt Waddell. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we turn to look at the fight for racial justice in sports. The FBI said Tuesday NASCAR driver Bubba Wallace was not the target of a hate crime and that a noose found in his garage had been there since last year. NASCAR described the item as a, quote, garage door pull rope fashioned like a noose and says it had been there for months before the stall was assigned to Wallace. NASCAR launched an investigation after a crew member discovered the noose Sunday at the Talladega Superspeedway in Alabama. Bubba Wallace, who's the only African-American driver in NASCAR's Elite Cup Series, tweeted the, quote, act of racism and hatred leaves me incredibly saddened. On Tuesday night, he told CNN he stands by what he said.
The image that I have and I have seen of what was hanging in my garage is not a garage pool. I've been racing all my life. We've raced out of hundreds of garages that never had garage pools like that. So people that want to call it a garage pool and put out old videos and photos of knots being in their as their evidence, go ahead. But from the evidence that we have and that I have, it's a straight up noose. The FBI has stated it was a noose over and over again.
So that's Bubba Wallace. On Sunday, a plane circled over the track at the Talladega Superspeedway, towing a Confederate flag and a banner reading "Defund NASCAR" to push back against the decision of NASCAR to ban the Confederate flag at its raceways. Meanwhile, Dustin Skinner, the son of former NASCAR driver Mike Skinner, apologized Tuesday for writing a Facebook post saying that Bubba Wallace should be dragged around the pits with the noose. Well, from NASCAR to NFL, where Commissioner Roger Goodell now says he encourages teams to sign quarterback Colin Kaepernick, we're joined by Etan Thomas, athlete and activist who spent 11 years in the NBA, co-host of the weekly podcast, The Collision, where sports and politics collide, with Dave Zirin. His latest book, We Matter, Athletes and Activism. It's great to have you with us, Etan. Let's start with what's going on in NASCAR. Absolutely astounding what Bubba Wallace has accomplished, pushing hard for the Confederate flag to be banned from the raceways, and NASCAR finally did comply. And to see, before the FBI just said they discovered that this noose-like rope had been there for months. All of the elite car drivers, Bubba Wallace is the only African-American elite NASCAR car driver, walking with him in a Black Lives Matter-like protest. And, of course, right before that, Bubba Wallace had unveiled his racing car, which was black with bold white letters, Black Lives Matter. And he wore a T-shirt that said, I can't breathe. Talk about what's happening in NASCAR.
I mean, I think, first of all, thanks for having me on. And I think it's amazing what's happening in NASCAR, to be honest with you. I had a chance to interview Brad Doherty, who is a team owner in NASCAR, former NBA player, yesterday for another show that I have, Center of Attention on Twitch. And he told me about the culture of NASCAR. And I have to admittedly know, I'm not a avid watcher of NASCAR. I don't watch NASCAR all the time. But he talked about how all of the different drivers rallied around Bubba Wallace and that show of solidarity, and how he said that in his words, that wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. Now, getting all to the particulars of the noose, and the FBI has called it a noose many times. They didn't say that it wasn't a noose. They didn't say it. Well, they called it a noose, just to make that clear. Of no matter when it was placed there and why Bubba Wallace was given that particular garage, I don't know. But they did call it a noose. But the part that was really impressive to me is, number one, the way that NASCAR immediately rallied around Bubba Wallace. They did more in 48 hours than the NFL did for Colin Kaepernick for 4 or 5 years, or however long it's been. But the show of solidarity around NASCAR, around the drivers, and so, which is different than the fans. So the fans had one reaction. You saw a lot of I've even seen in the Twitter mentions. I posted my support for Bubba Wallace, and I just saw the mentions after me. Like there's a certain demographic that is in NASCAR, and that's undeniable. But the drivers don't match that demographic. And that's one thing that I didn't know. I just thought I thought they were one and the same. But the show of solidarity is something that we're seeing all across the country. I think what we saw in NASCAR with that right now at this time, since George Floyd's murder, I've seen more white people who have been protesting, who have been, rallying around as allies, who want to be allies, than I have ever seen in my lifetime, to be honest with you. And we can't worry about where have you been all this time. You're late to the party. Okay, that's fine. We don't have to worry about that, but you're here now. So now it's time for you to use your privilege to be able to push for things to actually change. And I think that's a reflection of where we are in this society. And those drivers in NASCAR, they are pushing for the culture of NASCAR to change.
And Etan Thomas, I wanted to ask you about the other sports. Obviously, Major League Baseball is trying to salvage its season. The NFL is in a quandrum about what to do. And the NBA now is seeking to restart to get into the playoffs. But there are battles between the players themselves. Brooklyn Nets star Kyrie Irving recently posted on his Instagram account, it's clear white supremacy and corporations use us native, indigenous, black folks when it's beneficial for their agenda and pockets. So be aware of the truth in plain sight. So Kyrie is at least saying that the players should consider not participating, while LeBron James, obviously the biggest star in the NBA and probably in American sports, is saying, no, let's play and make our statements through our playing. Wondering your perspective on the battle among the NBA players about the way forward.
I don't see that it has to be a battle. I think it's two different approaches to be able to reach one common goal. We're going back to the '68 Olympics, and I had a chance to be able to interview both John Carlos and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in my book, We Matter, Athletes and Activism. And we talked about this very topic. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar elected not to go to the '68 Olympics. He didn't go. And John Carlos, of course, went to the '68 Olympics and, did the Black Power salute during the on the podium. And that reverberated to even today. Now, both of them deserve respect. And that's my issue with and my approach to hearing Kyrie and hearing LeBron. When I turn on the news and I'm looking at Stephen A. Smith and Charles Barkley and even Michael Wilbon and the inflammatory language that they use when describing Kyrie and Dwight Howard and Avery Bradley, who have said that maybe this isn't the best time for us to, be worrying about basketball. Maybe there's other things that are a movement that is going on right now that we should be focused on. And the words that they chose to use, like stupid and dumb and ridiculous. And I would ask Stephen A. Smith, would you call Kareem Abdul-Jabbar foolish for not going to the '68 Olympics? I don't think that's there's room for both discussions. There's room for a civil debate in both of these approaches. Now, on one hand, we have precedent. We have the WNBA, who did go and they went to their as an entire league a few years ago, and I was able to interview Swin Cash and Tamika Catchings about it in my book.
This is the Women's League.
What's that?
The Women's League.
The Women's League, yeah, the WNBA. And what they did a few years ago after the back-to-back murders of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling was they as an entire league made a statement. So every single game, what they did was they had an actual media blackout. So they would answer like 2 questions from the game. And then after that, every question would be dealing with what the topic was right there, which was police brutality and the police accountability and what they could do to change things. And they had the entire league. They had white players, foreign players that ain't even from here. They didn't even know what was going on, but they educated them on it, and they saw their sisters that were hurting, and they did it together. Yes, that's one approach.
Etan, I wanted to get your comment on the NBA Commissioner Adam Silver speaking about the league's responsibility in addressing racial inequality.
The NBA can have almost an unparalleled voice in this conversation because of what we stand for, because we represent, frankly, I mean, when you think about our players, some of the best known Black people in the entire world are part of the NBA and now part of the WNBA. So we know we can have a very important voice. Let's make sure that in returning to basketball, a larger, broader message about social equality, racial issues are not somehow lost in the discussion.
That's the NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. I was wondering what you think has to happen right now. He was talking alongside Magic Johnson in a virtual conversation, and then we'll move on to the NFL very quickly.
Well, I think that's just a reflection of who he is. He is very different than his predecessor. And people have to always remember under his predecessor, David Stern, Craig Hodges and Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf were white balls from the league. So he is very different. And I'm not just name dropping, but I interviewed him for my book as well. And I have another interview that I had of Adam Silver as well. And I asked him, would you punish someone who took a stand for something that you disagree with? And he said no. I asked him if he would punish Craig Hodges and Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf under his watch, and he said no. So he is somebody who has said over and over again that he appreciates the athlete voice. Now, Roger Goodell is different. And we could go right and pivot right to Roger Goodell, because all before he said one thing. Now he's trying to kind of slowly turn over a new leaf. And he first made the press conference and said now he wants to embrace, NFL players protesting and using their voices. But he left out Colin Kaepernick's name, which you can't really do without, mentioning the one person who you whiteball from the league, for doing exactly what you're saying that you're apologizing for now. But then he tried to come back with it, saying he wants to encourage teams. I don't know if it's too late for all of that, too little, too late type of a thing. But again, we can't worry about when people get there. If he's finally noticed it, if he's finally woken up, if he's finally said, okay, I was wrong and I want to change my ways. Okay, now let's see you put action to that. It's okay to say that, use the words and use statements and things of that nature, but now you have to put action by it. And so I have to see real, actual policy change in the way that he conducts it. And first, it has to be with bringing back in Colin Kaepernick, because he is the symbol of you trying to squash the athlete voice. It's not just about one person. It's about what you whiteballing the one person means to the entire culture.
He already mentions it.
Well, Atan, I want to thank you so much for being with us and end with the words of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who wrote in the Los Angeles Times, "Racism in America is like dust in the air. It seems invisible, even if you're choking on it, until you let the sun in. Then you see it's everywhere. As long as we keep shining that light, we have a chance of cleaning it wherever it lands. But we have to stay vigilant because it's always still in the air." Those are the words of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the basketball legend. Atan Thomas, I want to thank you so much for being with us. The podcast that you started, is started on WPFW, the Pacifica station in Washington, D.C. We go now to California. California is the place where COVID-19 is rapidly spreading through the state's overcrowded prisons. More than 400 people have tested positive at San Quentin State Prison, where the virus has reportedly spread to a number of cell blocks and even death row. The spread began when the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation transferred nearly 200 incarcerated people from a prison in Chino with a massive COVID outbreak to San Quentin and another prison. Outbreaks soon began at each prison where people had been transferred. At least 19 incarcerated people in California have now died from COVID-19. This follows months of calls for mass release. As advocates and incarcerated people warn, conditions make it nearly impossible to stop the virus once it enters a prison. On Friday, a U.S. district judge in Oakland wiped tears from his face, calling the San Quentin outbreak a significant failure of policy and planning. For more, we go to Los Angeles to speak with Adnan Khan, Executive Director of Restore Justice, which advocates for policy and alternative responses to violence and life sentences. Adnan Khan, formerly incarcerated, served 16 years and spent 4 years at San Quentin State Prison. We welcome you to Democracy Now! Adnan, I got to see you at San Quentin a few years ago when the Democracy Now! Team went there. If you can talk about what's happened. We had a show just a few months ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, where this was predicted, an outbreak at San Quentin. Explain how this happened.
It's very simple. They moved, the correction staff moved a bunch of people from one of the deadliest outbreaks. 16 of the 19 deaths in California prisons are recorded in the Chino prison. And 120 people were transferred from that prison into San Quentin, which 2 weeks ago had 0 cases. And that today, in about a week and a half later, we are over 400 cases. So when we say about preventable, I cannot say that COVID-19 could not have been prevented in San Quentin, but I do want to say that immediately after that transfer from the most deadliest prison outbreak that we've had in California, a huge outbreak occurred in our prison system here specifically in San Quentin.
And Adnan, many of the prisoners in San Quentin are elders. They're lifers with life sentences there, and they're particularly at risk. Could you talk about the San Quentin population compared to other prisons in the California system, and what Governor Newsom, who's in the news a lot about what he's doing for the rest of California, doing about the prison situation?
So first of all, Governor Newsom has been radio silent. He comes on and talks a lot about the COVID in California, and everyone in California will be tested. And he talks a lot about California, but refuses to talk about the prison system as if there aren't Californians, 120, actually 200,000 plus Californians incarcerating here in this state. So it seems like Governor Newsom has been radio silent on this particular issue. When it comes to the population, the demographic in San Quentin, yes, there are a lot of people who are considered lifers, people who are sentenced to life in prison, and people who have been there for a very, very long time or been in prison for a very, very long time. So we get this dichotomy a lot, and a lot of this deserving versus non-deserving conversation that we should only release nonviolent, low-level or drug offenders. I don't like using that term, but for context here. And I think that we continue to push away people who actually and factually are the safest population to release. People who've been deemed, quote unquote, violent for the rest of their life, and people who've been in prison since they were teenagers. I was sentenced to 25 years to life as an 18-year-old, and I was considered by law a violent person, but my actions proved otherwise. So there's many people in our prison system, particularly San Quentin, that have an elderly population who have been in prison for decades. And as we keep talking about, when we do talk about reducing the prison population, we only focus on the front door of prison, but we never focus on the back door of prisons, where there are people who are just jam-packed. And as we talk about mass incarceration, I think it's a very important topic to discuss static incarceration, where people are stuck in prison, not just the volume of people with mass, but when there's people stuck in prison who don't have a release valve, don't have a release date. We need to reorganize that and look at that again in our system.
And I wanted to ask you also about those people who do test positive in San Quentin. As I understand it, they're moved to a place called the Adjustment Center, where typically that was used for solitary confinement. Explain to us more about this Adjustment Center.
So the Adjustment Center has always been a place where it is solitary for those in solitary. So, for example, if someone on condemned row in San Quentin, out of the 34, 35 prisons in California, is the only place that houses people that are sentenced to lethal injection. So if somebody has a disciplinary infraction on condemned row, the Adjustment Center is the solitary confinement for them. And so what has happened is as COVID had this flare-up in San Quentin over the past 2 weeks, they have filled the Adjustment Center with COVID patients. However, they only have about 100 bed spaces there, and they're already 300 bodies over, or 300 people over the amount that they can hold in that Adjustment Center. So now I'm being told that chapel spaces, gyms, and other locations are being used as COVID patient wards as overflow. But as we've seen, within a matter of a week and a half in San Quentin, that lies in the middle of the Bay Area in Marin, the flare-up is at 400, which within a week. And we can expect a flare-up to be even higher, coming days. One thing I want to share is a lot of people in society feel like that what happens inside our prison system will not affect them out here in the real world. And I think that is the biggest mistake that we continue to make. So if we have in California close to 200,000+ people that are incarcerated in California, and over 67,000 staff that come in and out of these facilities, essentially every 8 hours, it is very difficult for us to believe that COVID-19 and coronavirus will safely contain itself within prison walls. And that's not the case.
You tweeted earlier this week, Adjustment Center, AC, in San Quentin, is where revolutionary George Jackson's historic incident took place. He was murdered by Corps outside of the AC. Now that's where 200+ COVID-19 outbreak cases are being sent. The AC, of course, within solitary confinement. Can you comment on this, the significance of this?
You know, the Adjustment Center has always been, prisons in general have always been seen as the, a punishment on society, on Black and brown people, on people who have already been criminalized just based on the color of their skin. When you bring that into prison, which we're talking about systemic oppression, I want to make sure that everyone knows that there's a tie to what's happening out here in the world with the uprising and the connection to the prison system. Really quickly, I want to say that there are literally millions of people in prison based on the quote-unquote credible testimony and written reports of the very police that we're seeing brutalize protesters, brutalize and shoot at media and nurses during these peaceful protests. And worse, the same officers who are responsible for murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and many, many more. And so there are lots of people in prison based on that. So as we're having these uprisings out here, and we follow what happened in history with the uprising in the 60s civil rights movement, George Jackson was a revolutionary that we can, it's hard to describe in a few seconds, but the incident took place in the very Adjustment Center now we're using to house people. I'm sorry. Yes.
We're going to have to leave it there. Adnan Khan, I want to thank you for being with us, Executive Director of Restore Justice, recently released from San Quentin. And that does it for our broadcast. A very happy birthday to Karen Ranucci. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks so much for joining us, and stay safe.